Well, welcome everyone. These 8 weeks have gone by very quickly. I hope this has been useful to you. It's been wonderful for me to try to capture the things I've been thinking about for the last, conservatively 65 years, and try to put them in some sort of fashion. And it all kind of came about with COVID and having a chance, more time to read. I'm actually naturally an introvert. I've learned to put shells around myself that look otherwise, but I feel much more energetic when I'm holed up in my cave reading and doing that sort of thing. Tonight I thought what I would do is finish up talking a little bit about artificial intelligence, and the way I'm framing this is about atoms versus electrons, and I'll go into a little bit of the thought process behind that and tie it back into the themes that we've kind of gone through. Klaus Schwab is the chairman of the World Economic Forum, and he came out with this book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And his comment is that we are now heading into the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and I would say, as we look at the world of AI and the amount of press it's gotten since 2020, we are currently in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now, for historical perspectives, the first Industrial Revolution really happened in the mid-1700s when we started to build mills that started to weave and that sort of stuff instead of everybody doing it by hand. It was automating agriculture and industry. And so we were moving fundamentally from using our hands to do everything to machines. Then the second industrial revolution happened in the late 1800s, and that was really the advent of more technology, electricity, railroads, really the movement of Enlightenment principles into science and discovery. And that really made another leap. So apparently having indoor plumbing and electricity was a step forward. One of the things to point out is with each of these revolutions, there's been a tremendous increase in the quality of life. So if you look at the wealthiest people in the 1850s, I don't think we'd want their bathrooms today. They may have nicer materials, but cold, drafty, and all those things. The third industrial revolution really came in the 1970s with the growth of computer technology, chip design, Moore's law, and now we started to get the computerization. And if we remember, we were all promised great savings with the advent of computers. In some places, it's delivered in very high measures. I think most in this room remember when you had to go to a bank to do all your transactions, and those thing called banker's hours. When I moved to Indianapolis in 1985, we made the mistake of trying to go to the bank at 2:30 in the afternoon. They were closed for the day. Now you have automated tellers and you have ATM machines. So now you can go anywhere, plug your credit card in and get money. When I was a resident, I was giving a presentation in California. I was newly married. I had my $500 Visa credit card. I was really happy. And I went to the hotel and they go, you don't have enough credit to check in. And so then my father-in-law had to go to Western Union, do a money order, send the money out to us. We had to give them the money order to turn in. So the world of automation has made things a lot easier. It's made it a lot more efficient. And so as we look at this, the whole world is changed by the mobile phone technology. And even when you look at places like Afghanistan, there's a whole culture of communicating via that technology. And that is a way of gathering people in ways that we hadn't really thought about. Now, just like Pandora's box and the whole story of that, there's both good and bad that comes with each of these revolutions. So the number of farmers necessary, if you look in Iowa, and you can look this up, they have every corn crop since about 1899. So in 1899, great farmland in Iowa, just across in the Lowe's Hills, was producing 25 bushel an acre of corn. Anyone want to hazard a guess of what we're doing now?
150? 240.
To 300. All of that are technology advancements. So one of the things, if we remember in the 60s and 70s, was the mass starvations that were happening in the world with the population growth. We've been able to overcome that by producing more food and reducing starvation. It doesn't mean there aren't catastrophic things out there, but technology has managed to improve our quality of lives and, frankly, everybody's quality of life with that. So now we're heading in to the fourth industrial revolution, which is now. We don't know how it's going to play out. Right now, we think it's going to produce major changes, and in some ways, sooner than we expect. So Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, one of the founders of Google or Alphabet, and Daniel Huttenlocher, who is a professor at MIT, talk about the age of AI. And it's a good read to kind of look at their perspective between where they think AI is and where humans are. And I encourage this. As we look at this, one of the things that strikes me, though, is this book is written in 2020, and it's already, I think it's published in 2021, is also a little bit outdated. So how many of you have heard of generative AI? So generative AI, that ChatGPT 3.0, 3.5, 4.0, working on 5, it is what's called generative AI. And what that does is basically it's spell check on steroids. So this all started off, if we remember, with correcting words. And so the idea is if you put a letter down, it would predict what the next letter was going to be. And that was kind of based on what was before it. What has happened over time is they've been able to add not only letters, but now words, and to put context to those words. And now they're going further forward and forward backwards in predicting what's going on. And with that, and right now they are using somewhere between 13 and 15 billion pieces of data in what are called large language models to generate a lot of the natural language processing, a lot of the communication, talking to your phone and having it do stuff. And so this has been really a major change. And one of the things that has happened is it turns out that ChatGPT will do really well on an ACT test because it's taken essentially everything written in Wikipedia and set it to memory. Computers do that really, really well. So one of the things we'll talk about is that computers actually are becoming more intelligent. Now, there's interesting questions on how you use the term intelligent, and we'll try to get into that. But they're now being more and more able to communicate in the way humans communicate. So that leads to all sorts of science fiction and discussions. And we'll try to get a little bit, and I'm happy to the ability that I have to answer questions or have a discussion. The second area of AI, which is really where I spend a lot of my time, is called predictive artificial intelligence. And that's where things like deep learning and neural nets and all that come in. So when you look at computerized chess games and you look at that, that's they're really based on predictive AI. And so what happens, and if anybody watch the Jeopardy when IBM Watson played, it was categorizing and weighing the chance that their answer was right. And so it turns out computers are very, very fast. And if it has a prediction that's 98%, it's going to come up with that answer faster than you are. Now, one of the things, unfortunately, I was caught on tape. I was interviewed on its program, and I said, right now, AI is at the level of sophomore medical students, which is they think they know something, but mostly they're annoying. I guess if you put it down once on tape, it might as well go down twice. But what happens is it's still in the learning phase. And right now, for me in healthcare, AI is not very useful. Now, it's going to be more and more useful, and since I'm spending my career doing it, I hope so. But I've had computers reading ECGs for me for the last 30 years. We still need humans, and that's a fairly simple thing. We still need humans to overread it. And one of the things I learned in my research is humans and computers actually approach things with different ways of doing it. And so from a scientific perspective, and this is what I learned working with engineers, when you have solutions that overlap, but their downsides or problems don't overlap, that's terrific. Because what happens when they overlap, the chance of them being accurate and true goes way up, and you don't induce the problems. It's when the problems overlap that you get in really big problems. So some of the things you hear now that they're working on is you can ask ChatGPT almost any question, including incredibly inane questions, and it will give you an answer. And so you have to be careful. And if you ask it the same questions and so forth, it can develop what are called hallucinations, which basically mean I'm just making things up and you're not going to know it. I gave a talk to our university on AI and bias. And one of the things that I talked about is you have to be careful in not believing the AI because it can be wrong and often is and you don't know it. So you have to have some healthy skepticism. So as I said, generative AI is about natural language processing, Siri and Alexa. A lot of my patients, I'll recommend getting an Amazon Echo in their room. Remember the clap on, clap off, and have the little wristband that says, I've fallen and I can't get up. It's really good at that sort of stuff. I had a patient the other day who was out in Wyoming and had a new Apple Watch on, got on a slip spot, slid down and couldn't get up. And the phone goes, would you like me to call 911? And he goes, no, call my wife. And the wristwatch called his wife. Those are things that are actually really, really useful. And so we're going to see more and more useful things coming out of it. So natural language processing is a good thing. Where we're going to see it, that it will start taking some jobs away. So you will need fewer people, for instance. Now, I hope none of you go through those golden arches or other, how did my partner say, anything with a drive-up window is not good for you, as a cardiologist. Now, it's actually good for cardiology. I don't want to confuse that, but it may not be good for you. A lot of that will be replaced with language models. I'm working on a project now with some great faculty and students at UNL and we're still very much in the infancy, to develop robotic assistants for the hospitals. One of the things we found out, we were talking to this patient, and he goes, it's so frustrating when I'm in the hospital and I have to push a button to have the nurse come because I want my phone and it's 8 feet out of reach. And I hate bothering them. Well, those are things that technology can do. And so what we're saying is we want something that does really something useful in the hospital, that reduces what nurses have to do, and actually increases the safe independence of patients. That's where natural language processing comes in. You don't have to do flip screens and everything. You can just talk to it and say, I need this. Turn on the TV. And it's going to be able to interact with the environment in ways that I think are going to be pretty cool. We also see it when it makes suggestions of movies or books we might like based on our search inventory. So that actually can be pretty useful. Now, in a second, I'm going to talk about the negatives because Netflix has recommended so many, 98% of things I never really ever want to see. You have to be careful about some of the bias that can be, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But having that sort of history, I don't know how to say this politely. I just bought 4 books off of Amazon based on your interest, I think you'd probably like this one. I go, shucks, yes, I'd like this one. Why not? You just push the button and 1 click later, it's heading to the Windle household. Now, one of the things to understand, and AI is not brand new. It started in the 50s and kind of developed, and what they thought they would do is just take smart people and figure out how they do things and then try to mimic it. And it didn't work very well. And so AI really dropped down in terms of interest and so forth until somebody said, you know, rather than trying to mimic human beings in their full form, what we ought to do is try to mimic how the brain works. And that's where you have all these neurons that come in and they match and they start forming patterns and pathways. And once they started doing it, then suddenly the intelligence came. We'll talk a little bit back in the neuroscience. Right now, AI does not have the plasticity of the human brain. It does not have nearly the number of connections. Even with 1 billion or 13 billion points for large language models, it's not outdoing humans, except in very limited fashions. So, but really understanding the neuroanatomy is where things have helped. And one of the real points of this book, and I'd say a take-home from this, is it's up to humans to decide how we use the technology. Now, as you know, I titled this Atoms and Electrons. And so one of the things we talked a little bit about, but I wanted to bring back, is the concept of good news is like Teflon, bad news is like Velcro. What has happened with social media and the like, and a lot of the AI algorithms that are out there, they're being programmed not to do what you want, but to manipulate you and move you towards things. And several years ago, there was an article in the AI talking about the best and brightest were leaving academia to go work for large companies to build these AI algorithms to really, in essence, create Velcro. And about, I'd say 4 months ago, NBC had an interesting thing where 2 reporters started off with the same profile on social media and then started clicking either more conservative or right-wing and other more left-wing, and looking at the responses and then clicking through. Within a week, they were completely at opposite ends of what was recommended to them, what was brought to them. And what happens is it's all based on clicks. And that's where you hear the term clickbait. And so one of the things that's important that we understand is we're getting manipulated by humans and using AI to do that. So we need to be mindful of that and build some of these structures in place. Remember my chimpanzee, original sin. AI does not have a conscience. It does not think. It does what it's told. It doesn't know right from wrong. And so as we look at this, you need to think of AI just like the chimp. It can be trained and modified, but we need to understand the limitations of it. So these are two books that I really helped form some of my thoughts about human beings and nature and how we pull things together. Christoph Koch is at the Allen Brain Institute, which is right next to the Allen AI Institute in Washington. And he's a neuroscientist and has done a lot of work in AI as well. Why consciousness is widespread but can't be computed. And this is a neuroscience evaluation of what it means to be conscious. And as we do this, there is always this kind of concept that only humans are conscious. Well, it depends a little bit on how you define that. Now, how many in this room have either a dog or a cat? Why do you have a dog or a cat? Because it makes you feel good. It gives you feedback. And if I ask, do you think your animals interact with you and learn from you and you learn from them? The answer is yes. And that's really the point that Douglas Hofstadter was talking about is I am a strange loop. Is that he breaks down consciousness and says, at some level, consciousness exists in part in smaller and smaller increments in other creatures and other systems. And so when we think about this, there's a reason that we treat pets well and have that feedback. It goes down probably even to further levels. So if you think about stimulus and response, when it reacts, if it can feel pain, it has, in my mind, some level of consciousness. Now, it may not, as we talked about in chimps, have intentionality. It may be all innate and triggered responses, but it still has that reaction. And that gets you back, to me, in really thinking about the way we talk with indigenous people in America about the land, the animals around, et cetera. And so as we think about this, then that forms a lot of going, well, if we're conscious and dogs and cats are conscious, then what else is? Now, goldfish, I'm not so sure about, for a short amount of time. They have apparently about a 12-second attention span. But you go up there and you have food in your hands, they're right there going, we're here, we're ready for you. But that helps you understand. There's also, in case you thought vegetarians were getting off easy, then the secret lives of trees I did not put on here. But it turns out trees communicate for each other, and they warn of predators and react. And a lot of the senses in terms of bitter tastes, a lot of poisons taste bad. And the reason they taste bad is that's protective, because other species won't like eating it if I taste bad enough. So there's a lot of science around the neuroscience. So what is consciousness? I think I'm trying to define that as the ability to interact, form, and what Christoph talks about is really coming across is that it's about sensing. It's about subjective measures. It's about seeing and smelling and hearing and tasting. And so these are all subjective. One of the points that he makes, and it's considered, he talks about AI as zombies. They can emulate human actions. They can respond, but they're incapable of feelings. So that's why I talk about atoms versus electrons. AI is electrons. It is doing what it's programmed to do. It is like a TV or a TV screen. There are some great programs on. You can go to a Broadway show. But when it's broadcast, it's just electrons coming through. So to have subjective experiences, that requires atoms. So when we look at things, when we taste things, those are all important. So what do I mean by subjective? We had a discussion the other day, and I wanted to bring this up. Subjective, it is the taste of dark chocolate. It is the smell of warm bread on a chilly day, like today. It is hearing your favorite song coming on the radio and thinking back to the stories that led to it. It's sitting on your porch reading your favorite Robert Frost poem. It's seeing your grandchildren running through the door. So to a question asked earlier, what's mythos? What do I mean by mythos? It's the taste of dark chocolate. It's the smell of warm bread on a chilly day. It's hearing your favorite song coming on the radio. It's sitting on your porch reading your favorite Robert Frost poem. It's seeing your grandchildren running through the door. So this is what being human is. It's understanding the concept of mythos. And one of the things that I felt pretty strongly about, and again, I credit Karen Armstrong for helping my understanding, too often we consider mythos to be the equivalent of mythology, which means made-up stories. And the origins are the same. The Greek origins of mythos are the same. But really the description is narrating, telling a story that's compelling. And as I talked about earlier, that's how humans learn. We learn by metaphors and analogies. We learn from these experiences. When we see things, we relate them back to our own experiences and create that. So I wanted to kind of finish up with this concept and this slide. I really like this yin and yang slide because it not only has that, but it has an activity to it. And one of the things I found in life is this is not a static process. You're never in perfect balance. There's always a tension between subjective and objective, but they're all interweaved and they change. And the challenge for all of us is trying to keep this balance as best we can. It's really mathematics and metaphors. I hope I've made that point. We're not getting rid of logos. We're not getting rid of mathematics. Those are good things. But we also need the metaphors to complete it. So just having logic alone is not sufficient. Subjective and objective. This is what it means to be fully human. Ultimately, I like to think about atoms and electrons. As we go into the future, there's going to be an important role for electrons. But what we really need is the atoms in the human experience and the human interactions. So back to the chicken with 40 cloves of garlic, about facts, honesty, and truth. Facts are objective. Honesty is subjective, and it's not random. As I've made clear, I do not like the concept of the multiverse because mathematically we should not exist. And how can we have genetics that's mathematically predicted for 3 million years? You can go back to the very beginning, and the same mathematics of evolution exists today that existed 3 million years ago. That's not chance. That's not surprise. That's not luck. But we have to be active. And hopefully I've made the point that truth is also science. I don't want to have to separate God and science. Science is the right way to look at things. I refuse to give up my scientific brain. It means I believe this, but I may be wrong, and I'm willing to update my thoughts as new evidence comes about. So, my last slide. Anyone prefer atoms to electrons? Because I learned last week, or reminded, that we are a church of donut holes. So I brought donut holes today for this break as we turn over to Dr. Sarton and our closing of his portion of the program. So thank you very much.
I was sharing with John when I saw the donut holes. When I was pastor at Northside Christian Church, they had donuts every Sunday morning. And our granddaughter at that time was about 3 and came to church. And of course, the donuts were a great thing. And it wasn't long before we were known as the donut church. When are we going to go to the donut church, Mom? I want to thank you for your being here and sharing with us during the past 8 weeks. And I really want to thank John. I really want to thank John. When we began a conversation, we were thinking about the numbers of people who are not a part of a faith community. Some labeled as the none and dones, some who have just decided that God is not relevant, a part of their life, or the church is not a part of their life. And as we talked about that, there were several things that came to our conversation. One had to do with this distance between science and faith. How on one end, science really did not see the need for faith, and on the other end, how faith didn't see the need for science. And yet that dialogue and yet the importance of that, and that there were a good number of people in the scientific world who were very involved in their faith communities, likewise a good number of people in the faith communities who understood and appreciated science, and that this conversation and this dialogue really needs to be lifted up. And as a progressive congregation, it seemed like we needed to have the language and the confidence to be able to talk about that and to share that in our journey with those that we meet along the way. Another part of this conversation came about as several of you had asked over time, having come out of traditions that were very rigid, very judgmental, having really put away some of their feelings about sin and sacrifice and salvation and crucifixion and resurrection, knowing that they did not accept what they had heard before. There were some different things, but exactly what was that? So it seemed important to try to put those together, because there are those who are away from the church because of the rigidity, the high judgmental aspect of the church, and because of not being able to put together science and faith. And so that's critical for us to do that and for us to have that dialogue within the scientific community, within the faith community. So in summation tonight, I'm going to go back and kind of take a look at some of the language of the church, because this is language of the church. It belongs to the church. It has belonged to the church for centuries. It has become distorted, in my estimation. It has become distorted by tradition and traditional understandings that I think are erroneous. And so I think that the question has always been in my mind, do we do away with the language and create new language, or do we try to redeem and to redefine the old language? And it seems to me, as we're talking to the none and dones, as we talk to people who have been away from the church for a long time, that if we try to build a new language, that really adds another layer of confusion. And so I think it's important to try to sort out and sift out some of the meaning that is important with regards to the language of the church. So the purpose in a nutshell was to reframe the traditional language and to express a theological understanding through the contemporary church, and to reframe significant words of Christianity so that they are unburdened of traditional distortion and allowing the Spirit of God. I think that the important thing about all of these words are really words, vehicles that are there to convey the grace and the beauty and the power of a relationship with God. And so it's important for us, or for me anyway, to try to clear away some of the garbage that has attached onto, I like that Velcro image really well, because some of it has really attached here. That the faith journey has always been about allowing the Spirit of God to emerge within and among the faith community and to connect us. One of the things that's really interesting to me is how negative the term religion is, and I can understand that. But if we take a look at that having come out of the Latin religio, which comes, and I don't know whether I pronounce this correctly, religare means to bind together. And so what we are really talking about is how we bind together one another with the community and with God, and to allow these symbols to convey the power of healing and transforming love in our lives, in our community. For those who are watching the video, you might want to just take a moment, because there's going to be a break in just a minute, and take 2 or 3 minutes and just breathe deeply and enter into silence and just listen. So I'm going to ask now that you just take a deep breath. If it's comfortable, close your eyes. If it's not, then keep your eyes open. If you need to walk around, that's okay. But take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. Take another deep breath. Let it out slowly. You take a moment to breathe and to center and to come back into the community. One of the pieces that's powerful for me in listening to that music, did anyone pick up on the rhythm? A lot of ancient peoples, particularly indigenous peoples, and particularly with those who utilize the big drum, the lub-dub of the heart. That it doesn't make much difference whether it's a Hopi or a Navajo. Whenever you hear the big drum, there will be that heartbeat rhythm that's underneath. Now, Hollywood took that and distorted it, kind of like words, our words distorted it. But it is just fascinating to me, and in meditation, it is really helpful for me to listen as that rhythm of the heart begins to become in sync. I encourage you to spend time listening for our inner wisdom. One of the things that is difficult and we need to guard against is our individualism, that oftentimes in our individualism, we think what we hear is absolute truth. And we have heard people say that. I've heard God speak to me that says. We need to have that in community, as there is the plumb line with regards to, is this of God? Does it speak of love? Does it speak of good? Does it speak of building up, enhancing, healing? So it's important not only to hear, but also for us to share and listen to one another. I want to just talk a little bit about sin again as we reviewed it. One of the things that John mentioned had to do with regards to the arches. As I've been given a heart diet and was kind of somewhat complaining about it, my wife said, well, it's very simple. She drilled it down a little further. She says, anything that tastes good, just spit it out. Not totally so, but almost. But sin, you know, we have attached somewhere this heavy judgment. And this judgment that is so heavy that it's such a burden that we just can't carry. And yet that's not the idea of sin. The sin is a broken relationship. And it is a broken relationship in terms of a broken relationship with God or a broken relationship with one another that needs to be healed. And it's important for science and faith to walk this path together. At the time of Jesus, someone who would have tremors would be considered to have had a demon. Today, we just have medical terms for that. And we're able to do a variety of testing, and we understand and know what that particular tremor means. So it's important for us to constantly understand our faith in terms of science and science in terms of our faith. So when we talk about sin, if we talk about sin in terms of its ancient wording and understanding, it is broken. And when it's broken, it's not quite right. And so therefore we can talk about a demon or Satan, evil, because there's something broken here. Like idolatry, there's something broken that needs to be put back together. It's not demon possession. You know, it's not that now you're possessed for the rest of your life. It's saying there's something broken here that's not in tune, and it needs to be put back together. I think sacrifice is one of those words that comes out of our biblical tradition that we really could do without. I mean, I'm really not certain that the understanding that comes from our biblical tradition with regards to sacrifice at the temple has any meaning for us at all. In fact, if we were really to follow our brothers and sisters at the synagogue, they did away with that when the temple was destroyed. You know, when the temple was destroyed, there was no longer an emphasis, as I understand it, upon sacrifice, but still understanding the voice and power of God is coming through Torah. So, you know, I'm kind of ready to wipe that one. I am ready to wipe that one off because I think it's better to follow the teaching of Jesus in our community. Jesus didn't call people to sacrifice. What he called them to is to be servants. And in dealing with our journey, says to us we need to die to our own life, our own egos, and be raised in a life of servanthood and love for others. So salvation is virtually the restoration of a relationship. It is restoring that relationship that has been broken. And it is the desire by God to restore the relationship. It is the desire of God to extend grace. One of the things that I really do think we need to listen to and change our language is that there's so much language about how we reach for, strive for, reach, understand God out there, as our meditative moment reveals. And as we talk about the Imago Dei, God is within us. It's not so much a reaching out there as it is allowing that Spirit to emerge within us. So salvation is just a confirmation of that we're not alone on this journey, that we are together and that God is present within us and loves us. It's not a matter of striving for, it's a matter of allowing. And when we talk about loving God, one of the aspects of love that probably is the most difficult for me is acknowledging that I need to be open and vulnerable for God to love me. Just as my love for you, the deeper that goes, the more I open myself and become vulnerable to allow you to love me. And so as we journey upon this, as we make this journey of salvation, it is opening ourselves to receiving love and to sharing love. We've talked about crucifixion, and it has all kinds of baggage with it, and I think we just need to be honest about that. You know, the crucifixion of Jesus was nothing more than the most gruesome execution that you could imagine. I mean, it was the most vicious execution that the Romans could imagine. It was done, it was painful, it was gruesome, it was a sign, this is what happens if you disagree with Rome. And it is intimidating. I think we need to just see it as that. So one of the discussions with regards to reclaiming sin and move away from the emphasis of judgment and putting it in the context of the church is because to some degree it is absent in the conversation of sin. If we take a listen, in our contemporary discussion, sin is either determined medically, a person has a mental disjoint, and it is addressed mentally, or it's legal. And you know, there are no other questions. It is a legal decision about how we deal with sin. And yet if we take a look at faith, the faith needs to be a strong part of this conversation because it brings into that element of recognizing and affirming that we cannot accomplish apart from our reconnection, as in AA, to our greater power, this eternal acceptance of God's love. Resurrection. This was another one of these that has had so much baggage on top of it. But I think if we take a look at the context, we had a group of people, men and women. Some of the women have kind of gotten written out of this, but it was men and women who traveled with Jesus, who experienced the most imaginable beauty in their life. They had seen a message, had experienced a message in which they were honored, in which they were recognized, they were affirmed, and they were considered to be part of the community. And then there was this trauma that occurred. Jesus was taken out of their lives, crucified, executed. Some denied him, Most of them ran away and hid, and they were frightened and apart. But something happened. We don't know what that was. We do not know. Science can give us a lot of different possibilities. We don't know what happened. What we do know is that those disciples who were in extreme fear, who were feeling extremely isolated and alone and apart, were empowered. They were empowered by the love that they had experienced. They were empowered by this vision that Jesus had presented before them. They were empowered to reclaim that strength that they had experienced when they were with him. So much so that they risked their lives to share that. They knew that they had been transformed by the presence. I've tried to think of a contemporary example. And the other day when we were talking about this, there were several different thoughts that went through our minds. But one of those is, how many of you have seen the movie Gandhi? You know, there are several places in there that are just powerful for me. But one of those is, if we remember, the British were in control. I mean, India was virtually a colony of Great Britain. And there is a scene in there in which the followers of Gandhi had become so empowered with their own sense of value and worth. And the symbol of the power of Great Britain was the salt works. And so there is this beautiful scene of hundreds of Indians lined up, and they approach the gate of the salt works, and they are beat down, and they are beat down, and they are beat down. But finally, those who are doing the beating cannot beat any longer. And there is this powerful message of resurrection, of hope, of new life that comes in the midst of that movie. Forgiveness is not a transaction. Denny really helped clarify this the other day in a conversation. It isn't, and we need to remember this, it's not a thing that occurs in a moment. It can start there. It can be part of a momentary interaction. But forgiveness is God's constant welcome. Forgiveness is our welcome. And one of the things that we need to clarify with regards to forgiveness, that does not mean approval of behavior. Those are separated. A person's behavior may or may not be changed by forgiveness. We see that from the cross. You know, if in fact these are the words, Father, forgive them. They didn't change their behavior, but there was something powerful that needed to be expressed by Jesus, and that is the avenue that opens the door for change in behavior, is when one feels that forgiveness, hears that forgiveness, understands. So one of the pathways towards transformation, towards new life, reconciliation, is forgiveness. But I think we always need to hold in mind it does not necessarily mean restore fully the relationship. In our human journey, there are times that we just may not be able to trust. We may not be able to completely fulfill and accept the person because of the behavior. But the important part is for us to forgive and to provide the opportunity for that person to grow. And it may not be in our relationship. Any questions so far? Well, those are our words. They are in process. We have been affirmed and confirmed that God is alive. The scientific community, a good portion of it confirms that. So when we pause to listen, we're assuming, we're presupposing that God is there. Well, yes, God is there. God has been there from the beginning. And so it's a matter of listening and then to allowing the Spirit of God to come at work in us and among us and through us. And it might just happen through our changing some of our words. As good countryside folks, let's go with our blessing, okay? And this is a prayer phrase, so we'll just go with that. And may the Spirit of the living God, known most fully to us through Jesus Christ, go before you, go before us to show us the way. Go above us to protect, go underneath us to hold us up and provide a foundation of strength. Go beside us as a constant companion. Go behind us to push us into areas that we may not go ourselves. And go within us so that we know we're not alone, but we are loved beyond our wildest imagination. And may the Spirit of God's love lead you forth from this place, restoring you to life. Amen.